If they're hearing that. And we are live. Hi, and welcome to my webinar today. My name is Francis Wade. I'm with Framework Consulting, and our topic today is what's wrong with business process reviews. It's a pretty meaty topic by any stretch of the imagination. And let's see, I'm going to flip over to my video so we can actually see each other just a little bit. See how that works. It's going to take just a minute to get there. Okay. And there we go. And I'm going to wait a few minutes just to have people check in because I know everybody's going to be maybe a minute or two late. And while we're waiting, if you could test the comments feed, which is just below this video, if you could add a comment in, because today's presentation is going to be really interactive. It's going to be more like being on WhatsApp than it is watching a video. So you're going to be interacting with me all the way through. And let's see if I can see some comments coming in. Let's see what we can get. Okay, looks like we have a couple of people in. If you could leave me a comment just below the video so I could refresh the screen so that I know that someone is here or some people are here and that they're leaving comments and I can read them. Comments are very tricky here on Facebook Live. And not seeing a comment just yet. But we'll keep hanging on for just a minute. And let's go back to the header view. What's wrong with business process reviews? We're live and it's 1 o'clock and it's an interactive session. So I can see that folks are here. I just don't see any comments just yet. I can see my friend, consultant here in Jamaica, is the first person to check in so far. Great, let's see who else we have in. If you could just leave a message in the comments to let me know that you're here. This is going to be very, very much like I said, it's going to be like a WhatsApp conversation. It's not going to be like watching a video, I can promise you that. And I can see a lot of good friends from here in Jamaica who is also checking in. Thanks, guys. We'll start in just a couple minutes as people make their way in. Probably about 5 past the hour. So if you're just joining us, you're in the right place. It is working. I think I'm being heard because I'm getting comments back. If you could leave a comment just right below this video where it says write a comment. Let me get my picture back up here. Yep. If you could leave a comment just below this video to let me know that you are online and that I can see you, because our interaction is going to be very important this afternoon. It's a very warm day here in Kingston. I'll have to keep remembering to refresh the screen. Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. And again, if you're just joining us, you can see people coming in. Just leave a comment in the comments below so that I know that you are hearing me and that we can start interacting and I can start getting into the content of the video. So welcome to What's Wrong with Business Process Reviews. And to those of you who are here, thanks for being here on a Saturday. This is not an easy day to make for a topic that's really a business topic. And today is a day that we're in the middle of, or just starting a sort of a long weekend here in the Caribbean. Tuesday is Emancipation Day. Monday, many people are taking off. So many people are taking it off as a long weekend. But not us. We're here doing work because we're very serious, right? Okay. It's 5 past, and if you can continue to leave comments in the box below, we'll know that you're here. And I'm going to flip over to the slides, so you won't see me for a while. You won't see me actually until the very end when I come back and take some questions. So let's flip over. This does take some getting used to. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Francis Wade and I'm the president of Framework Consulting. And I've been in the game of business process improvement since about 1988. Before it had that particular name, it's had a number of names. Since then, it became re-engineering at some point. It was TQM in some ways at some point. Became business process improvement at some point. And today I'm going to be sharing a bit of my own journey, but most of it has to do with the improvements that I see that we could make, particularly here in the Caribbean, around the way we conduct what are normally called reviews. I'm going to make a case that there's a far better way to do them. Okay, so like I said before, this is going to be a lot like a WhatsApp conversation, more like that than it is watching a movie. The reason I want to do that is to not only include you, but also base this on your experience and not just mine. And at the end, I want to offer you 2 complimentary downloads. They'll be on the very last screen, I believe, and then I'll take some questions at the end also. So if you haven't already checked in, just add your comments in, just to test and make sure that your comments are being heard. Just add a comment in at the very end of the video, just at the bottom there. Let me take a look and see if all the people have come in. Okay. So takes a little bit of time for the screen to refresh for me to get everybody in. Alrighty then, so if you could add that quick hello. I'm not able to pull the screen up, but I'm going to go ahead anyway and just proceed for the time being. So, why is it so hard to implement common sense business process improvements? Even when there's no disagreement, so all the executives agree that something must be done. Why is it so hard to put in place business process improvements? So this is one of those times when I want you to leave an answer to that question in the comments. Just flick right over, just go below the video and answer that question. Why is it so hard to implement common sense business process improvements? What does your experience tell you? Okay, looking for some answers. Let's see what we get. Some of the typical ones that I hear is that there is no agreement as to what business process improvement actually is. So people use the phrase, but they're talking about different things even though they're using the same language. Sometimes there's just plain old resistance. People just completely are against the idea because they believe it has something to do with downsizing. A lot of times it has to do with what the review is all about, if there is a review. So someone else comes in, does a review, and when you actually look at the results, There's something that's missing, even though the review is done by experts who do know a lot and are able to accomplish a lot, and their analysis somehow leaves something to the imagination. Okay, look, looks as if there's a bit of a lag that's on the line, so it could be that my questions are lagged by a minute or so. I'm seeing that the page is taking just a minute to refresh itself. Could be because we're on a weekend. I see that someone else just joined. If you could answer the question that we started off, those who are just joining. Why is it so hard to implement common sense business process improvements? Especially when there's no disagreement that something needs to be done. So the executive team meets, everybody agrees, yeah, we need to put in place this business process improvement thing. And at the end of a year, there's been a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So why is that the case? Just answer that question for me in the comments. Okay, I'm refreshing the screen to catch your comment. Whew. It is a bit slow today, so I'm gonna move on to the next. Let's assume that my answers are somewhat on target. That there's a challenge that people have in implementing even the most common sense changes. So one problem that I've noticed, one of the ways in which business process management is broken, is that everyone does their own thing. So one of the indicators, the symptoms, is that in a company there may be a standard process in which everyone is told to do their own thing. However, when you actually check things out, you see that everyone has their own method. No, it could be that part of it is because of neglect, that not everyone is taught the same process. So the word of mouth that goes around leads everyone to execute it in a very different way. Another reason could be that it's just plain laziness, the neglect that comes from not being diligent. Everyone just wanting to do their own thing, not wanting to follow the proper procedure, not being disciplined or motivated enough. And then the third way is that everyone is a MacGyver. So everyone is smart enough to figure out the workaround that they need to put in place in order to get this thing done. And what happens is that you end up with 50 variations on one process. And these 50 variations are being conducted by all these different MacGyvers who are really, really skillful and good at making their own process changes. So they bypass the standard process and they invent their own process. So that's all four indications that the process is broken. And maybe some of these are true in your company. If they are true, go ahead and leave an example of where you've seen this happen in the comments. And I'll pick them back up in just a minute. But we're going to go on. I know there's a bit of a lag, so I'm going to go on and take the next way in which we know processes are broken. So the next way is that, very simple, there is secret knowledge. A few people know how to deal with the exceptions that are usually the people who have been around for a long time. So they're the ones who come in when that funny screen comes up, or they're the ones who come in when that strange case occurs that no one has seen for 5 years. Most people who do the job aren't able to manage, so they have to call in someone who's been there for a while to actually help them. And the reason that the person has to be there live and in the flesh is that there's no documentation. Or if there is documentation, it's old and it's stale and it no longer applies to the process the way it's currently being executed. So the fact that there's no documentation means that if one of those older persons were to leave, they would leave a big old hole. So a mass exodus would be catastrophic. And there are cases of companies here in the Caribbean where people have actually left who are experts. And I think you know the story. They've had to hire them back as consultants because no one could do their work. company in particular I'm thinking of offered an early retirement package that was so healthy, everyone took it. And the experts were gone. I had to bring them back because no one knew how to do the work. They didn't take the time to see if it was documented before letting them go. So the third symptom is that people are trying hard to get the job done, but it's now convoluted. So no one has taken the time to simplify the process. It's complex, which means you need lots of people who know bits and pieces to work together to make the process function. And one example happens a lot in customer service. So many customer service people are frontline workers who are highly trained. They're very good at dealing with upset customers. They're very good at problem solving. However, what they'll complain and tell you is that the process is bigger than they are. And no matter what they do, they can't go deep into the background or the back end or the deep parts of the process to fix those parts so that they can deliver better service. They're stuck with a system either on their desk, or they're stuck with a process that feeds them that doesn't work. So they can't deliver service no matter how hard they try and no matter how much training they've received. That's a third way in which our processes here in the Caribbean are broken. A fourth indicator is that your company only focuses on lag measurements. So lag measurements occur after the fact. They don't probably come in until a month or 2 months, 6 months after events have occurred. By then, whatever was the problem has now shifted. It's now a different problem. I've worked with companies that use the balanced scorecard. The scorecard isn't produced or isn't approved until 2 months after the fact. By then, it's too late to do anything. By then, you can't change anything. By then, the root cause analysis can't be done. Problem solving is bad. And nothing can be done. So the company may be measuring something, but they're not effective in doing so. So again, business process management is broken in those cases. Just taking a swig of water here. And the measurements typically occur in 4 areas that we're going to be talking about today. So one is unit costs. The other is cycle times. The third is defect rates. And the fourth is customer satisfaction. So these are the 4 areas in which we can measure the quality of a process. And we're going to talk about them a bit later. But typically measurements fall into one of those 4 areas. So my question to you is, are you having these experiences? And even worse, are you experiencing negative emotions because these experiences are coming at you faster than you can fix them? If so, just leave me a note down in the comments once again. I'm going to try and pick them up once again and see if I can get the page refreshed. Let's see. But just answer that question real quick. What does the future look like if the problem isn't solved? Even worse. Because often the experience I hear is one of total frustration. It's of banging your head against the wall and seeing nothing work. There's a sort of a level of suffering that people go through as they feel themselves trapped inside of a process that just can't work. Okay, I'm getting a couple of comments coming in that there's some agreement about the third broken process that I mentioned. And someone mentioned that there's a sheer lack of will coupled with people feel too bogged down with their day-to-day. Yep, unless specifically called on to own this new task, it becomes easier to neglect it. That's so true. Plus, there's also a lack of know-how. So these are just some of the problems that we experience and the awful feelings that go with it. You know, it's just not fun to come to into work every day and see the same problems taking place over and over again, and knowing that you're going to come in the following day and the same problems are going to repeat themselves. It just feels as if you're stuck in a dead end. It's what motivates me, because when I go into companies and find people who are that unhappy, I know there's something that we can do about it, and that's why we're here today. There is not a dead end. There is a solution. However, there are some facts to be faced, and here's one of them. So the diagram that I put up is the process maturity chart for companies in terms of how skillful they are at implementing business process management. So if you look across the spectrum from 0 to 5, you see that the first is that they just acknowledge that there are operational inefficiencies. Actually, I'm going to flip to the next slide because we're going to focus on each one in detail. But take a look at the overall. You can see one that's at the very high end is very, very skillful. Ones that at the beginning, at 0, are sort of the beginners. So let's start at level 0, where most of the companies happen to reside. Most of the companies in the region, where processes are being repeated every day, so it's not a startup situation where everything is done ad hoc. However, there are very few measurements and very few in-process measurements. As a result, there's little or no effort spent tracking how processes are being executed in those 4 areas I mentioned before. The unit cost, that's not being managed on a day-to-day basis. The defect rate isn't managed regularly. Customer service, and the fourth one I mentioned, I can't recall this right now. But there is no in-process monitoring. And it ends up being a process of trial and error. And pretty much due to the quality of the person who is in the job. That's the number one determinant. Everything else is secondary or tertiary. If they have good people, you may get lucky. But by and large, there are no systematic solutions. So that's level 0, where most companies are at. Level 1 is where a few companies are, where processes have just begun to be understood. So there is, of course, here some documentation. The reality of where the company is in terms of these processes is being confronted on a process-by-process basis. They've been able to set aside the feeling of inadequacy, embarrassment, and shame that the processes are in such bad shape. So now you're actually measuring using actual numbers as opposed to using just emotions. It's a far better place to be than level 0, as you could imagine, because now you're starting to make some progress. Now you're actually starting to measure, and because you're able to measure, you're able to make some basic improvements, which takes you into level 2. So I've not met a local company that I would say is long entrenched in level 2. I think a few are touching level 2, where there is measurement and there are regular improvements being made. Metrics are being collected on a regular basis. Some optimization and problem solving is taking place based on these metrics, not just egregious problems. So simple problems that don't involve a whole lot of effort can be repaired or anticipated because there are some measurements that are being used. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't know of local companies who are operating outside of level 2, 0, 1, or 2. Most are at 1, most are at 0, sorry, a couple are at 1. The rare one may be at 2. I haven't met any at 3, 4, and 5. So we're not going to focus on that. But as you look at the company that you work with and the companies that you have experience with, tell me, are they 0, 1, 2? Or have you come across a 3, 4, or 5? Just answer that question in the comments. I'm going to flip over again to the comments to see where... refresh the screen and see if we have any further comments based on the prior questions I asked. Okay. Okay, we're going to go on to the next. So, question, did anyone happen to see me skip something? So I skipped over something that's actually pretty big. As I was giving the explanation of 0, 1, or 2. Take a look at this chart. Do you see anything that I happened to miss? Well, I did. And here's what I missed. I skipped it on purpose. Was something in level 1 a big step to identify process owners and a governance structure. So what does that mean? Well, it's actually something that's really important and something that is absolutely rare to find. See, the typical review is done by an outsider. So what happens with most companies that they hire an outside consultant? Someone like me sometimes who knows how to do business process reviews. The team comes in, spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. They behave like auditors. which means that their primary job is to evaluate, and they go into the mode, which is a typical mode that auditors take, which is, let me tell you what's wrong with your process. Let me tell you where you're lacking. And they, as a result, produce a report. And the report lays out in glaring detail where all of the processes in the company are falling apart, which is not news to anyone who is in these processes, working on them on a daily basis, or those who manage. But seeing it all compiled in one place is pretty daunting. So here's the question. Why doesn't anything happen next? So slip your answer in. Why, from your experience, put your answer in the comments. Why doesn't anything happen next? Well, some say that there's no buy-in. It's outside in. It's sort of like an outside virus, and the company's defensive structure, defense system, mechanism sets up and rejects anything from the outside. The culture is often not taken into account here. The people who have the expertise come with it, do their thing, and then leave with the expertise. Yeah. So there's a big gap between what's in that report and what is actually done on the ground by the people who remain. So usually nothing happens. And I'm going to tell you this is a tragedy, because all the money is spent doing business process reviews. There's one company that I worked with on a separate topic, and they shared with me 2 business process reviews. Nothing had been done as a result of either one. Sort of a real sad story, because they paid a lot of money for the first one, which had been done maybe 4 years prior. They paid a lot of money for the second one, which was done 2 years prior. And as a result of either one, nothing had happened except that a report had been produced, which now sat on the shelf. So I saw a copy of it. I thought, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. It was all in gruesome detail, just like I said, almost like a forensic audit. It leaves people with this impression at the end that this business process stuff just doesn't work. And that's a mistake. Business process, anything works if it's done well. Business process reviews, as conducted in the way that I described, they don't work. However, you're not on this webinar just to hear about the problems. You actually want to solve them. You want to know, when everybody sees the same problems, why can't we work together to solve them? And I want to take you in the pages to come, the rest of my presentation, from the point where you can't see any way out, and it seems as if that your company or you may be stuck, to a future in which there's a possibility that actually calls to you, that inspires you to action. A different way. And I'm going to tell you, I'm someone who thought that reviews made sense. I'm someone who totally downplayed the importance of anything to do with the people side of business. When as I said, I started doing business process improvement in 1988. And it took a couple of failures to realize that there was something to this people side of things that I was discounting. As a young engineer, I thought I knew a whole lot. And I had degrees and training and knew the latest. And only to discover that I didn't know that much. And everything that I knew happened to be technical only. So let's take a look at the 3 steps that are going to be needed today to solve this particular problem. Business process reviews, how to fix the problem. And we're going to focus on 3 issues. One is technical and human perspectives. The second has to do with getting buy-in, and the third has to do with implementing from the inside out. So let's start with the first, the technical and the human perspectives. So what is business process management? Well, from one perspective, business process management consists of 3 steps, which everybody understands. The first step is that you start by detailing the current process. And here on the screen you can see a pretty complex looking process. The second step is always that you, after you detail the current process, is that you slice and dice that current process, and that's the second step. The third step, as you could imagine, is that you implement something that's even better than you had before. 3 simple steps. Unfortunately, this only captures one point of view. So let me ask you, who in your company is likely to see this side of business process management, the technical activity? Well, sometimes it's the people who are in IT, operations. Sometimes it could be a CIO who's in charge of infrastructure. Sometimes it's a CEO himself, finance people. Often it's usually everybody who happens to fall outside of HR. They only see the one side of the coin, and they focus on the one side. And in some companies, many companies in the region, business process management actually reports into IT. However, it's tricky and it's difficult. It's almost impossible to focus on the other side of things, which is how do people work together? We know that when people work together on a process, there's a routine that they followed for years, for a long time. We know that the most experienced people, as I mentioned before, they know the exceptional cases. And we know that learning happens by apprenticeship rather than any set training. Or if there is a set training, as soon as the trainee comes back into the job, someone sits down with them and tells them, you see everything you learned in training? Foolishness. Disregard all of it. Start all over again. Let me tell you how it really works. And their eyes are open for the first time to the way work is really done. So this core group tends to work very closely together. They know the system inside out for the most part. So let's imagine one day, out of the blue, sometimes, they get handed one of these, the reports. They get handed the report. So sometimes known to them or sometimes unknown to them, usually they don't get the full picture, but a report lands on their desk. And that consultant who came in 3 months ago, they're now looking at their report. And they say, I thought they were working on something different. I thought they were working on IT something or the other. Well, yeah, but they didn't quite tell us that they were working on our job. Oh, really? So they get handed a report. And what do you think their reaction is? Well, for a team who gets surprised by someone from the outside who's now telling them what to do and how to do their jobs, here are some of the reactions maybe. And let's see why they react this way. I can imagine you have some ideas as to why they get this reaction. You can put your answer in the comments if you have one. Sometimes it's just plain old resistance. Sometimes it's just the immune system kicking in. But let's see some of the ones that I typically run into. A lack of ownership or buy-in, so they weren't involved in the study, or they were just used as guinea pigs, or they were just used to debrief. They were just used for fodder to provide information. And I've heard executives who actually talk in this way. So they lack ownership and buy-in. There's no engagement of people, either before or during. And then the after is when they actually say, okay, implement this report. All the different departments get the report, and they open it, and right away they start to see flaws. And the flaws are valid. And the flaws come about because the consultants are never able to understand the process in the depth that those who do it actually know the process. As a result, they don't ask the right questions. As a result, the people who are in the process don't answer their questions in full. And oftentimes, they don't even know the things that need to go into a good process review or analysis. They never done one before. They're just being asked a bunch of questions. So the things that are really important, some of them have become part of their unconscious competence. So they become good at handling their exceptions. So good that they've forgotten that they are exceptions, and they've forgotten that they need to be explained to outsiders. So just because it falls into that you don't know that you know this thing category, Johari window, you don't say anything. And that leaves the consultant without knowing this fact. The consultant's report is flawed. So this is a very big deal, and I've not met a consulting firm who would openly admit that this is really what happens. As a result, it renders their report theoretical and ideal. And the people who know how these things work can't implement and won't implement what the consultants have said. And unfortunately, maybe one of the worst downsides of this particular approach of doing process reviews is that there's no way to repeat the process without bringing in more outsiders. So the consultant has to come back if you want to repeat the process. Just like the company I mentioned earlier. Because there's no internal capability. No time has been taken to develop, train, or staff people who actually know how to do what the consultants did. And then it gets worse. So this takes us to the second part of my presentation today, which is getting buy-in at all levels. So the typical organization, actually just before I do that, let me just check the page and see if there's any comments that have caught up to where we're at. I won't necessarily see that we have quite a few people who are in listening. Let's see if there's comments that apply to where we're at. There does seem to be a good lag between the presentation I'm doing here and what I'm seeing on the screen. And that's okay, that's just a function, I guess, of how Facebook does things. But the typical organization looks like what I have on the screen. This is just a generic picture. With a CEO, different functional managers, and then a tree under each functional manager. So the structure, of course, is invisible to the customer. The customer doesn't see the structure. The customer doesn't know what the structure is of the company. They don't see that hierarchy. They just know that they have a sequence of activities that need to get done. They don't know about who owns what. They see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 steps to be done. To get this job done, I need to do these 8 steps in sequence. And I want to get it done quickly. And I want to get in out of this place fast because I have other good things to do that are much better than doing business to get this thing done. However, what the customer does not know, that you probably know, is that the customer's process crosses several functional silos. So they don't know that there's separate functions that they have to deal with within the company in order to get the job done. So sometimes if they have a complaint, it falls between the functions that people engage in. And as a result, it falls through the cracks. So their complaint sometimes, the problem that they have, just kind of disappears. And they're left wondering, what just happened here? So we've all had that experience of dealing with a company that they said they would get back to you the following week. A year later, you're still calling and you don't know what to do next. Well, the reason that happens is because you're following a process, which goes, in this case, from sort of left to right. They manage from top down. And the result is, there could be lots of gaps. As a result of the left to right process that the customer is trying to follow in order to get the job done, the fact that it goes left to right and crosses different business units or different functional units means there are no process measurements. The best you may find are measurements that exist within a particular function. But for the end-to-end process, the 4 measurements that I mentioned before, unit cost, cycle time, defect rate, and customer satisfaction, they just aren't measured. Because who's going to measure these things across the entire customer cycle? There's no one in place. So the problem People realize that there's an issue, but they have no tools or a means to actually solve the problem. A few people might take the initiative, so they might set up a cross department meeting. So underwriting might meet with sales, for example. They have a meeting, they try and fix the process, and it's a one-off activity. It may work and it may fix the problem for the short term, but there certainly is no level 1 process maturity kind of metrics. Instead, the overall process goes ignored. The solution lies in a new kind of manager, what's called a process owner. So remember that little box that I said I skipped over that was in level 1? It had something to do with governance and had something to do with process ownership. These are the two that I skipped over. And these are the parts that when an outside consultant comes in and leaves a report behind, they don't even touch. So what's needed is a new kind of manager, a new kind of position, what's called a process owner. Someone who can own the entire process from, again, left to right. Someone who cuts across all departments. Someone who has process accountability. What's needed if you have process owners, and process owner is multiple process owners. In other words, a parallel structure to the one that exists in most companies. The process owners who own these different streams of work, again, that cross these business units, report to one executive. That executive needs to report to the CEO. So should that person, that top executive, be someone who heads up IT? Should it be the head of HR? Or should it be someone else altogether? So I'm going to point you in the direction of an article I published a few weeks ago in the Gleaner. It's called Getting IT and HR to Cooperate on Change. They actually dropped the word process from the headline. But at the end of today's presentation, I'll show you how to get this article. Because the right answer, the best practice is, well, let me ask you. In case you're just joining, where I'm taking questions that I'm asking in the comments below. If you could answer the question in the comments just by typing it in as I'm going, and I'll go back and try and scoop them all up at the end. What are some alternatives to HR and IT? If it's not HR and IT that leads this function, this parallel organization, reporting to the CEO, having all the process owners report to him or her, then who should it be? Well, as again I said, outsiders like consultants, they can't put it in. Now, I've seen different ways of doing this. So there is no right answer per se. So one answer is a committee sometimes, reporting to the CEO. A lot of times there's a chief process officer, a process czar, a chief transformation officer, according to a recent article by McKinsey, a chief operating officer sometimes, but sometimes they get bogged down in the day-to-day and never quite get to the process work. But whoever it is, it needs to be someone that's not in HR and not in IT, because those organizations are naturally at odds with each other and they see the world so differently that it can't work. So the best way to implement the kind of business process management I'm talking about is in two directions at the same time. Top down via governance, and bottom up via the approach using teams. We're going to talk about in just a minute, but let's do the one. Let's talk about top down governance, not HR or IT, as I said. Instead, someone else. The bottom up comes from cross-functional teams that work for the process owner. They may be matrixed in. So here you'd have, in this example I gave, there's 4 process teams, 4 cross-functional teams. As you can see, they are staggered in time, so most organizations wouldn't want to launch 4 improvement teams all at the same time because of the pain it would cause to manage all of them. So here, for example, the first one starts in Q1 2018. The last one starts in 2019. You don't want to have too many efforts going all at once. And plus, you may want the same process owner, the way I have the person who's in charge of the red process also is in charge of the yellow process, same process owner could come back for another stint. I've seen process owners own more than one process. Difficult, but it can be done. You may want to recycle team members also. So these team members aren't just being thrown on each process team willy-nilly. They need a great deal of support. So they need, just like I have there, they need training. They need often live facilitation. So this is where the consultants can be useful. They can assist in working to help the team to do the 3 steps I mentioned before: the baselining, the improvements, analytics, and the implementation. And they can be there to coach the team all the way through its activities. But they're relying on the knowledge of the team as opposed to trying to replace it with their own PC knowledge. So teams need heavy duty support. There's no way they can get this done, from my experience, just by winging it. The job is too tough. So sometimes people ask me, sort of smart Alex, oh yeah, what about automation? What if there's a process that needs to be actually automated because there's brand new technology out there, and it needs to go from having 30 headcount to 2 headcount? Why would a process team put itself out of business? Why would people fire themselves? They're going to come up with a solution that doesn't involve new technology or robotics or artificial intelligence or all of the things that are now becoming a necessity to do business. My answer is sort of facetious. That your worst fears about your people may not be true. And if you continue to indulge in them, you have a different problem. And you're a part of that problem. That's a very unpopular answer. But it goes to the culture of the leadership. It goes to the entire culture. But it says something about the leader's ability or inability to inspire people, to lift them out of their circumstances, to get them to the point where they can do something for the benefit of the entire company as opposed to just themselves. Now, I'm not saying that that's easy. It takes a particular kind of Michael Manley-esque kind of leadership. In the good way, Michael Manley. But if it can be done, a team can be inspired to do the right thing for everyone. Now, it makes sense also to give them guarantees that we will retrain you, you'll be doing a better job in a better place in the company, we'll take care of you. This is not meant to take away your lifestyle. It's not meant to do anything bad. So that makes sense. But ultimately, it's a matter of leadership. And if your leaders can't solve this problem, then there's a different issue that needs to be solved. Sometimes that issue can be solved just by doing business process management well, but it does need to be addressed. So, in summary, what about these business process reviews? Well, shortcut, draw blood. It is manifestly easier to hire a consultant. It may even be cheaper. Bring them in for 3 weeks. Have them produce a report. But when they walk away, don't expect anything to happen. Expect the report to build up dust. The best practice is to develop internal capability. And I can say from experience, when a CEO or an executive tells you, oh, we don't have time, you do have time. You've convinced yourself that there is a way to get this done that works, that can take less time, but there isn't. Many projects I've worked on where CEOs, not worked on, sorry, I'm aware of, because my advice wouldn't be taken. They tried to take shortcuts, only to have the project delay and delay and delay and delay. And once implementation starts with people who now get the report, the same phenomena happens every time. So what's better? A sustainable approach is to use process teams. Give them what they need to be effective. Appoint process owners. Get to work on doing a pilot. So phase them out over time. Don't try to do them all at once. Put in place a top executive who reports directly to the CEO. Make sure that person has the power and the span in order to serve the entire organization from end to end. And that's the only approach that really works. It's the one that honors who people are and the hard work they've done and continue to do to execute the processes that are currently in place. So I'm going to flip over to the Q&A, but just before I do that, we have a couple of downloads that are available to you. They are absolutely free of cost. The first one actually refers to the article I mentioned before about getting IT and HR to cooperate on process change. That's a free download. You can also find it on the Gleaner if you're very smart. But if you leave, I'm going to leave them both, leave links to them both in the comments below so you can download that article. I'm going to do it just as soon as I flip from the slides. And then we also have a compilation of 4 prior articles. One is called Don't Write Off Stupid Employees. Here's how they can deliver smart process outcomes. You can guess where that one is coming from. Second one is Got a Backlog of Anything? Use process, not psychological solutions. Third is your company wasting employees' time with flawed processes? And the fourth is The Overlooked Power of Process Management. I recommend all of them if you have an interest. And again, they're going to be in the comments below. And then finally, we have what we call a Luncheon Learn. So a Luncheon Learn is an opportunity for us to come in and share some of our ideas on topics like business process management, some of what we've seen working in the region, sharing it in a 45-minute presentation, a 15-minute Q&A. It's absolutely complimentary. All you need to do is to set it up with us. We have a conversation with you to understand sort of what's happening on the ground in your company, which topic you would like us to focus on. We only focus really on topics that we know something about, like strategy, change, business process, productivity, culture, these types of things. And it's an opportunity to bring us in and have your executive move to the next level and hear some ideas presented in a way that's very, very provocative. So for further learning, here are the links that I'm going to be including in the comments. In a couple of weeks, I actually have a column that's coming out. It's going to be on the topic of process reviews. It's going to be on August 14th, I believe. I haven't even written it yet, so it has to go through the process in order to be accepted by the Gleaner and then published. But that's when they normally come, about 2 weeks from today. And then the 2 links that I have listed, if you're listening in and you're not seeing the chart I'm working with, the first URL is goo.gl/P, (A, G, K, M, Y). That's to get the download on business process management. And the second about the Luncheon Learn is https://goo.gl/6 F, C, E, and the number 5. And both of those start with HTTPS. Okay. All right, so I'm going to close down the presentation, come back to my picture, see if I remember how to do that properly. Hope I have to be on the right screen. Close down that picture. Open the other. Okay, it's not flipping over just yet. Let's see. See if I can get to flip over. Alright, so I close down the... Okay, there we go. Clicking the wrong buttons. So I'm going to look at the comments that are over here on the Facebook page, and I'm going to comment on the comments and see if we can get some questions in that might happen quickly enough for me to answer. In the meantime, I'll also address some of the common questions that people have. So one of the very common questions I get is, how do I convince my management? that they need to take a different approach. Not an easy one to answer. Sometimes you can find, if you really look, find case studies that are, if you Google failed business process management and look for examples of the cases I shared with you where the team needs to be formed from the very beginning, the team's knowledge needs to be tapped into, the team needs to be the one that drives the improvement, not the outsiders. You can find actual case studies where people share. There's actually academic studies that I've found. A few of them now coming out around automation and the use of robotics. That having an outsider come in and just treat it like an IT project is a recipe for failure. And there's lots of research that shows that that result is the one that's most likely to get perused. So a good Google search can get you some cases. If you want personal experience, some of the articles I've written speak to that issue. This webinar certainly does. So sharing this webinar with your senior management team, having us come in for a Luncheon Learn is also useful. But if you go and talk to people who are, if the company is involved in business process management already, you'll hear the complaints that I mentioned. If it's housed under IT and you talk to HR, you'll hear things like, if you ask the head of HR, how is it going, how are you involved in the project, and they'll say, I'm not involved. They're not including us at all. Same goes with IT. If you ask them, if it's housed under HR, how's the business process management project going? IT says, I have no idea. Not involved. And I've heard those answers from different companies more than once. And those are signals that you can use to understand and say and demonstrate that there's something very, very, very wrong with the way the project is going. Something is fundamentally flawed. So the evidence will be right there. And if you offer up the evidence that you hear and some of what you read or gather from this source, the webinar, and other sources, you'll be able to share with them and say, and they'll understand, oh, yes, that's right, there is a problem. If you ask them what you think the problem might be and where it's coming from, they'll be good enough to tell you, yes, we think the problem is, and yes, we sort of agree with you, that's exactly what's happening. They'll tell you what their impression is. So if you can gather evidence from these other sources, and if you can have just an inquiry, open conversation in the right setting with people who are already sensitive to what's going on and they want to fix the problem, you can get that done also. So the answers are already there in the situation that you're dealing with. Okay, let's see. Refresh the screen. Okay, still a long lag. Wow. And this technology does take a little bit of getting used to. I know from having done it. We try. I'm not even seeing all of the comments actually, and I'm not sure why. How interesting. I'm going to put a comment up of my own. Sort of see how that works. Final questions. See if I see my own answer. Yep. Okay. And now a typical question that I get is, how long should this take? Well, it depends. I can tell you it doesn't take place quickly. And I can promise you that it doesn't matter what level of automation you are intending to implement. As long as you have expertise in areas that are not distinguished, hidden expertise, the exceptions that only a few know how to handle. That you have to use these people to implement anything. So that lengthens the process. So in a way, it's a penalty for not having documented the process up until now. You're playing catch up. You're not only trying to automate, but you're automating on top of a certain level of lack of information, a certain level of ignorance that you as maybe the project manager are trying to operate on top of. So your job is especially hard because you're trying to implement and you only have partial information. You cannot be an expert in multiple processes. It will never happen for you that way. But you do have experts to work with, and that's the best that you can possibly hope for. Okay? The expertise is there. It's up to you as the protagonist to tag in, find the people who know these things, who know the information, empower them in the right way, train them to take the steps that I mentioned, give them the help that they need, and help them to be successful. And that's how you'll be successful. Okay? All right, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank those of you who, I won't mention you by name, but those of you who logged in and spent time with me today. Appreciate it. Sorry about the lag that took place between what I'm doing and what you're seeing. But hey, that's technology. And don't forget the downloads. I'm going to put the 2 links in just a minute here in the comments. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. We're all on Facebook, www.fwconsulting.com. And I look forward to hearing about the success you have implementing process change in your company. So this is Francis Wade from Framework Consulting, and I'm signing out. Take care. All the best.